Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Well, as I mentioned this morning, I'm going to be talking right this moment to Lydia Bradey. Now, this woman, adventurous woman, well, she can't find hills high enough to climb up. When I look back, I see where Lydia was born in Christchurch, and her father was absent for most of her childhood, and she and her mother struggled financially. But Bradey took up mountain climbing as a teenager. So she went on her first wilderness expedition at the age of 14, and by 17 she had climbed to the summits of Mount Cook and Mount Aspiring. And during this time she regularly climbed with the well-known man and her friend Rob Hall, later met her friend Gary Ball. And when she was 19, Lydia left New Zealand for a 4-year international climbing trip, which included an attempt on Mount McKinley in Alaska and 10 ascents of Yosemite's Big Walls, 7 of which were the first ascents by a female. So nothing stops her from climbing anything. We haven't got anything big enough around here to invite her up to try it out. So we've got her on the telephone line. She lives way down there in the bottom end of the South Island. Good morning, Lydia.
Good morning.
Goodness gracious me. Do you look at the maps and say, now, which is the next biggest hill I can climb?
No, it's not about height, actually. It's about difficulty, or it's about the view, or it's about, the alpine lakes that are on top of the hills.
Yes.
All kinds of mountains.
And you get right around the world doing this all the time.
Yes, I'm lucky enough to have worked as a mountain guide, and I still work as a mountain guide in different countries, as well as doing my own trips.
Right. So the dangers inherent in this, your hobby. Is it a hobby? Do you call it a job these days?
No, it's definitely a job when I work
Right.
as a guide,
Okay.
and it's a passion.
Yep.
And it's really funny because I was wondering whether we would call it a sport as well. So just like any kind of sport, a board sport, in the olden days there was skiing and then there was surfing, but now there's 1,000 different board sports. And
Yes.
climbing is a little bit like that. There's all different kinds of rock climbing. There's all different kinds of ice, alpine, high altitude climbing. It's diversified a lot.
Yeah, sure. So you got this into your blood, and it just the thrill of climbing up something and challenging yourself, is it?
Perhaps for me it was more about, it was, yes, challenge for sure, but also I have a really strong bond with nature, and I really value the experiences I share with people on expeditions, and I value living very simply, but in a life where the decisions that you make have consequence. And I don't mean every decision is about you're going to die or survive.
Sure.
It just might be you will go thirsty if you don't melt snow for water. Things have a kind of a base meaning, which they may have been like that when we were quite primitive, and I have the luxury of choosing to go into that world again and be surrounded by beautiful things.
Well, at 17 you climbed Mount Cook. Was that a scary sort of a thing to do at that age?
Yes, actually, I just had my 18th birthday.
Right.
I climbed Aspiring when I was 17, and then climbed Mount Cook, but by two decent routes, so you can climb Mount Cook by a technically so-called easy route, but that is really hard.
Right.
Like, quite a few people that we would guide up Mount Everest could not climb Aoraki Mount Cook.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, no, Aoraki is a tough mountain.
So it's tougher than Mount Everest?
Technically.
Technically, yes, yeah.
And also on Mount Everest, we have ropes. So if we had ropes to the summit of Aoraki Mount Cook, then it would be a lot easier as well.
Right. Now, it's not, we're getting on to Mount Everest, but you've not only just climbed Mount Everest once, but you've done it several times.
Yes, so I've climbed it for myself without oxygen. So I'm the first woman in the world to climb without oxygen, and I'm still the only New Zealander to have climbed Everest without oxygen. And I have guided it for adventure consultants 3 other times, and it's a real honour to be a guide, and it's quite different, and it has its own challenges as well.
When you say the first New Zealander without oxygen, there was some doubt as to whether you did it, but I mean, we know you did it. But what was the challenges like without oxygen, getting towards the top?
First woman in the world, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
The challenges, well, there were no ropes from the South Col, which is our high camp, which is just a hair's breadth under 8,000 metres or 26,000 feet. So no ropes was a biggie, and I was on my own that day. And, you can't see altitude. So it's it's not like a sort of a risk or a danger that you have to step over or that you have to fight your way through. It's something that is in the air, because basically it's not in the air.
Right, yes. So you're climbing up. When do you normally, well, if you're taking a guided tour up, when would they normally take in oxygen?
We can put people on oxygen as low as, say, 6,500 metres, but generally we put oxygen on the summit push at about 7,000, 7,100 metres, and that's just below Camp 3 on the Nepal side.
Right.
I haven't climbed it on the Tibet side, on the China side, but my partner has climbed Everest 9 times, actually.
Goodness.
Yes, I know. I think we have the highest shared ascents of any household in the world, probably. But I assure you, we don't always talk about Mount Everest.
No, I suppose you don't. But just physiologically, you must be built to be able to withstand the fact that you don't need oxygen.
Yes, you acclimatise, and I still don't think I acclimatise as fast as, say, other men I know who do well at altitude, but I obviously do okay. And it's a matter of going up and down, and letting your blood get thicker so it can carry more oxygen. And there's other invisible things that we don't 100% medically understand. Like, it may be that if you and I went on an expedition, you may do significantly better than I, except I probably can walk up snow faster than you.
I see. Right.
Possibly.
Okay, now we're climbing up Mount Everest. We're getting towards the last 300 or 400 metres, and they say that's when it really gets tough. Is that the truth, or is that...
Yes, I would say so. And it's what's been commercially or popularly labelled the death zone, but I used to call it, like, super altitude, 8,400 metres on. And you can acclimatise. You can sleep at 8,000 metres without oxygen, if you're acclimatised enough, and you do okay. But after that, it starts to get pretty
dicey.
Hard to breathe. Yeah, really, really hard. Yeah.
So we got up to the top after that exhausting last little bit. What was the view like when you got up there the first time?
Well, it was later in the day, and once the later in the day comes, it was an early afternoon, and in the Himalayas, the morning is really the most beautiful time, because you can see the dawn rise around the curvature of the Earth. So it's absolutely gobsmackingly stunning. Plus, there is not a lot of low cloud, and by low I mean 23, 24, 25,000 feet. I mean, that's low. And so once you're really later in the day, the light is, of course, more above you. It's flatter, so that all the perspectives aren't as dramatic, and pretty much everything except the one or two other mountains all look like low mountains.
Yes,
even
right.
if they're 7,000, 7,500 metres, they still just look like pointy things.
Yes.
So it's the dawn that is really and the evening that is really the most dramatic. But for me, it was such a relief, because when I got to the summit, I knew I could go down.
Sure.
And I wasn't quite sure I would make it all the way, so that was sort of one stage ticked off.
So you got a bit dizzy? Snowbite?
No, didn't get snow. I wouldn't be here if I got snowblind. If I got dizzy, if I got snowblind, if I got confused, I wouldn't be here.
Right.
There is no way I would have got down. It's reasonably technical, and
yes.
There were no ropes.
So getting down is about...
the fact that I am here indicates that I pretty much kept it together.
So getting down is just as easy or easier than getting up, is it?
No, I'd say getting down is a bit... sometimes.
Yeah, okay.
Sometimes, yes. Walking at altitude, if you just have a walk down the snow slope, walking downhill at altitude is unbelievably easier than walking up.
Right.
Different than here, like 3 or 4 times easier than walking up. But once you have something technical, when you're climbing up, you climb up with your feet and 2 hands, but when you're climbing down, it's quite hard to do that, so that makes it a little bit more challenging when it's steep, technical terrain.
I better just put this into perspective for our listeners who don't work in metres. That's about 27,500 feet, isn't it?
What, the summit of Everest?
Yes.
Actually, it's 29.
29, is it? Right.
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you look back to see how Sir Edmund Hillary did it with his basic gear, how do you compare your climb with that? Because I put it into the sort of same range without oxygen, but he had very basic gear, didn't he, compared to what you would be using?
Yeah, surprisingly, the oxygen technology didn't really change enormously when I first was climbing it, and the first time I actually climbed a mountain with oxygen as a guide, we were still using old Russian Poisk masks, which are cloth masks, so less like the fighter pilot, like we used to be fighter pilots.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so technology, I tell you the biggest thing, and that came in after my first Everest ascent. The biggest change is that we have weather forecasting now. So Ed Hillary and actually I did not have weather forecasting when we first climbed it, which means that you could easily make several attempts on a mountain and keep missing the weather window.
Yes, I should imagine so. So this was going back in, 1988, was it?
That's right, yeah.
Wow, it's going back a fair way now, isn't it, when you think
about it? You know, the thing that Ed Hillary did, and Tenzing, of course, is that they'd been working really hard, so they were quite tired, over a long period of time, and they climbed something relatively technical that no one had been on before, and so it was completely unknown, yes. And so that was the big thing for them.
Right. And there's no flag on top of Mount Everest, is there?
There's lots of flags. There's lots of prayer flags.
They stay up there, do they? Yeah, I wondered if they ever got blown off or anything like that, but obviously...
Yeah, they probably do over winter. Right. And then when the first people summit again,
yes, they
stick a whole bunch of prayer flags. You've got to be careful, because the prayer flags are all tied together with string, and you're walking around on a very steep mountain with a whole lot of other people if you're guiding. So you go out there with your clients and your Sherpas, and so there's a lot of people, and everyone wants to sort of mess around the very tippy summit, and then and you've got all these flags tied together with strings that can catch your crampons.
Oh my goodness.
You could say, what's the scariest thing on the summit of Everest nowadays, and it'd be like getting caught in your prayer flags.
Sure. Were you disappointed? I don't suppose in those days there was as much rubbish as there is now on Mount Everest. Are you disappointed in the way it's been left these days?
Considering how many people climb Mount Everest these days, it's really not too bad. And in the olden days when I was climbing first, if you and I were going to Mount Everest and we were talking about it, you and I would ask each other which route we were going to climb and how we were going to climb it. Nowadays, pretty much people only climb two different routes on the mountain, one from the north and one from the south. So that's a bit grubby.
Right.
But the rest of the mountain is left alone, and comparatively, other mountains are left completely alone. So you kind of got to toss it up, control it in a dense environment versus leaving other mountains alone. It's kind of an okay compromise, yeah.
But we've still got people in the world who say you never climbed it without oxygen. I suppose you get that all the time, do you?
No, I don't have it.
No?
I don't actually anymore.
Oh, good. Yeah,
no. And it's been, it was accepted years and years and years ago overseas.
Sure. Well, that's fantastic news. I was not aware of that. It's not greatly heard about here in New Zealand, is it, that feat of yours?
No, but, slowly.
Oh, right.
No,
okay.
I've probably got quite a lot of recognition overseas, but
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you'll rush out now after this phone call and go up to Mount Cook and climb that just before lunch, I suppose.
Oh, not quite. Aoraki Mount Cook I have a lot of respect for, I can tell you.
Yes, they say it's a dangerous mountain. Is it more dangerous than climbing Mount Everest?
No, not more dangerous. But it is, it's a dangerous mountain.
Yes.
But it is honestly one of the most fantastic mountains to climb. It's 1,000 feet. It's 300 metres higher than the second highest in New Zealand. And when you stand on the top of Aoraki Mount Cook, you can look along the chain of the South Island, the mountain range, and you can see all the west coast. Of course you can, and the east coast plains, and it really is an amazing mountain to climb.
Sure. So what's your next challenge then? Or you've got a group that you're taking away?
Yes,
Lydia?
I've got a couple of climbing trips. I start in the middle of December, my guiding. I've just had a very small knee operation, and so I've been recovering from that.
Okay.
And I'm very privileged. Next week I'm going to speak to the Silver Fern up in Auckland, so I'm very excited about that.
Yes.
And then in January, I am going with my partner and some friends to go ski touring in Kyrgyzstan. And then I go to France, and I'm a judge on an international grant for giving money to women to make first ascents in the world.
Oh.
And this is very new.
Yes.
New this year and been very successful so far. So, yes. And then I come back and I work again.
Yeah. Well, it's an honour to be doing that privilege, giving awards away and money away to women. And, well, wish you all the best for that. But just finally, I suppose there's always a danger. It doesn't matter whether you think it's okay or not. There's always that danger which is in the back of your mind, and you're just prepared for it, I suppose, are you?
Preparation, you put it's absolutely correct. Absolute preparation all the time, and never be too proud to admit that perhaps this slope is a little bit too avalanche prone, or you're not fit enough for something, or the mountains are a humbling place as well as an inspiring place, and I think that's the best preparation to be really prepared all the time. Yeah.
Well, Jan Bolger's play Taking the High Ground's going to encapsulate what we've been talking about today, I should imagine. So it's on from tonight. Lydia, have you seen the show at all?
I haven't. I've seen Jan when she came down and acted and sung Bill Massey's Tourist, and that was exceptionally good. And I've met most of the people involved in making the play, and I'm very excited, but I haven't seen it. I wish I was in Wellington for the opening night.
Well, that might be giddy heights on a scaffold to sort of take in the atmosphere, so the health and safety will come into action there, I should imagine, Lydia. But thank you very much for your valuable time, and enjoy the Christmas climbs that you've got in mind.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time as well.
Thank you. There we are. Lovely lady, Lydia Bradey, first woman in the world. Comes from New Zealand, who climbed Mount Everest without oxygen, which was in doubt for some time, but it's happened.
106.3 Beach FM.